In 1968, the muscle car war was turning America into a battlefield of burnt rubber, shattered transmissions, and screaming V8s. Chevrolet had the 396, Ford had the 390, and the brutal 428 Cobra Jet. Pontiac was pushing the 400 hard, and Chrysler had something strange. Not the legendary 426 HEMI, not the terrifying 446 pack, something quieter, something most people completely overlooked, the Dodge 383 Magnum. And what almost nobody realizes is that this engine may have been one of the smartest, toughest, and most underrated big block V8s of the entire muscle car era. Because while everyone was chasing giant horsepower numbers and quarter-mile bragging rights, the 383 was doing something different. It was winning in the real world, on the street, on highways, in daily traffic, at stoplights, in thousands of cars ordinary people could actually afford. And the craziest part, it was often faster than people expected, more reliable than its bigger brothers, and balanced in a way many legendary engines never were. But history forgot it. So how did one of Dodge's best engines end up living in the shadow of monsters like the HEMI and the 440? Well, that story starts inside Chrysler's massive engine development program during the mid-1960s, when engineers realized America had become addicted to cubic inches. Back then, displacement was king. Bigger engines sold cars, bigger engines won races, bigger engines terrified insurance companies, and manufacturers were in an arms race that seemed to have no ceiling. Every year brought more displacement, more carburetor throats, more compression, more everything. Chrysler's B-Series big block platform had already been around since 1958. It started as a shorter deck alternative to the massive RB engines. The idea was simple: create a lighter, more compact big block that still made brutal torque without the weight and bulk of the larger platform. The 383 cubic inch version arrived with a 4.25-inch bore and a 3.375-inch stroke. That combination mattered a lot. See, unlike the longer stroke 440, the 383 loved to the shorter stroke reduced piston speed and stress at higher RPM. That meant the engine could spin faster, smoother, and more willingly than many larger big blocks of the era. While the 440 was building massive torque down low and then struggling to maintain momentum at high RPM, the 383 was still pulling hard past 5,000 revolutions per minute, like it had more to give. Most people don't realize how advanced that was for the time. By the late 1960s, Dodge engineers transformed the basic 383 into the high-performance Magnum version. Compression jumped to around 10-1, depending on the year. Bigger valves appeared in the cylinder heads, dramatically improving flow rates. A more aggressive camshaft gave it a rougher idle and stronger mid-range punch. And Chrysler topped it with either a Carter AVS 4-barrel carburetor or, in some applications, dual snorkel high-flow induction systems that gulped air like the engine was starving for it. The exhaust manifolds were redesigned for better flow. The ignition system was upgraded. Even the valve springs were stiffer to handle the increased RPM. Every detail mattered, because Chrysler knew this engine had to compete in the most brutal performance market in automotive history. Factory ratings varied by year, but the famous version made 335 horsepower and 425 pound-feet of torque. And those numbers were lies. Well, kind of, because during the muscle car era, manufacturers often underrated engines for insurance reasons and racing classifications. On dynos, many healthy 383 Magnums were producing closer to 360 or even 370 horsepower gross. Some dyno operators who tested these engines decades later found peak numbers even higher when the engines were properly tuned and running on period-correct high-octane fuel. In lightweight B-body Mopars, that was serious power. A 1968 Dodge Dart GTS with the 383 could run the quarter mile in the low 14s right off the showroom floor. Some magazine testers recorded 13.9-second passes at over 102 miles per hour with slick conditions and good traction. Hot Rod magazine famously tested one and couldn't believe how hard it pulled in second gear. Carcraft ran multiple tests and kept getting consistently strong numbers. That was enough to embarrass a lot of supposedly faster cars. Chevelle SS 396 owners learned this the hard way. Ford Fairlane GT drivers had bad nights because of this engine. Even some big block Corvettes got surprised when an innocent-looking Dodge Compact walked away from them. But there was a problem. The 383 had an identity crisis. See, Chrysler itself accidentally buried the engine under its own lineup. If you walked into a Dodge dealership in 1969, the salesman didn't want to talk about the 383. He wanted to talk about the fire-breathing 426 HEMI, making a rated 425 horsepower with dual Carter AFB carburetors and 10.251 compression. He wanted to talk about the 446 pack, with 3 Holley 2-barrels inhaling enough air to sound like a vacuum cleaner from hell. Those were the headline cars, the ones in the magazine ads, the ones with the wild graphics and the dealer markups. The 383 became the middle child, too big to be economical, too small to be legendary. And yet, that middle ground was exactly what made it brilliant, because the HEMI was expensive, very expensive. Insurance rates were insane, maintenance costs were brutal, spark plugs were difficult to access because of those massive hemispherical combustion chambers. Headers cooked starter motors until they failed. Fuel economy was catastrophic. You'd be lucky to see double digits on the highway. And the engine demanded constant attention, high-octane racing fuel, frequent valve adjustments, specific oil. It wasn't a casual ownership experience. Even the mighty 440 had issues. Its longer 3.75-inch stroke created massive low-end torque, but at sustained high RPM, those engines could suffer oiling problems and bearing stress in racing conditions. The increased piston speed at high revs created harmonics that could damage components if you weren't careful. Drag racers knew you had to build them carefully or they'd grenade after repeated abuse. The 383 avoided many of those weaknesses. It revved cleaner, ran cooler, and in street trim, it was often more durable than the engines people worshipped. The shorter stroke meant less stress on connecting rods. The block was incredibly strong with thick cylinder walls. The oiling system worked well even under aggressive cornering, and because it wasn't pushed to the absolute limit like the HEMI, components lasted longer under normal driving conditions. Mechanics loved them. One former Mopar technician reportedly said, "You could beat a 383 all weekend and still drive it to work Monday." That wasn't always true for HEMI. And then Dodge dropped the engine into one of the craziest cars imaginable, the 1968 Dodge Dart GTS 383. Now this thing was borderline irresponsible. The A-body Dart was compact compared to Dodge's larger Chargers and Coronets. Stuffing a massive big block 383 into that smaller engine bay created chaos. Engineers barely had room to fit exhaust manifolds. The battery had to be relocated. Power steering became unavailable because there physically wasn't enough space. Air conditioning? Forget it. The engine filled every available inch of space under that hood. And weight distribution? Terrible. The nose became so heavy that early testers complained the front suspension felt overloaded. The car wanted to plow in corners. Braking distances increased. Tire wear became uneven. But when you floored it, none of that mattered. Car and Driver tested one in 1968 and recorded 0-60 miles per hour in around 5.8 seconds. That was supercar territory back then. Faster than many Ferraris of the era. Faster than Corvettes with smaller engines. Faster than almost anything you could buy for anywhere near the price. Imagine pulling up next to a Camaro SS, thinking you're about to dominate some ordinary Dodge compact, and suddenly hearing all 383 cubic inches roar through dual exhaust. People weren't ready for that car. But the real magic of the 383 wasn't just raw acceleration, it was torque delivery. Peak torque arrived around 3,400 revolutions per minute, and it hit hard. The engine didn't need sky-high revs to feel violent. Even slight throttle inputs produced instant movement. With Chrysler's famous Torque Flight 727 automatic behind it, the combination felt unstoppable. You could nail the throttle from a rolling start and feel the rear end squat as power transferred to the pavement. The 727 itself deserves respect. This transmission was practically indestructible. 3 speeds, massive internal components, bulletproof planetary gear sets, clutch packs that could handle absurd torque. Drag racers abused them for decades because they simply refused to die. You could neutral drop them, power brake them, slam them into gear at full throttle, and they'd just keep working. Modern tuners still use them in 1,000 horsepower builds because the fundamentals are that strong. And paired with the 383, it created one of the best street drivetrains of the muscle car era. But then the real nightmare started. By 1970, the muscle car war was becoming unsustainable. Young drivers were wrapping 400 horsepower cars around telephone poles every weekend. Federal emissions regulations tightened. The Clean Air Act was coming. Fuel economy concerns started creeping into the industry as people realized these cars were environmental disasters. Safety advocates were screaming about death traps on wheels. And suddenly, compression ratios became public enemy number one. The high-compression 383 Magnum began changing. Compression dropped from around 10, 1 toward the low 8s, by the early 1970s. Horsepower ratings collapsed as manufacturers switched from gross ratings to net ratings, which measured power with all accessories attached and restrictive exhaust systems in place. Cam timing softened to reduce emissions, exhaust restrictions increased, carburetors were retuned for economy instead of performance. A once aggressive engine started losing its teeth. In 1971, the 383 was replaced in many applications by the larger 400 cubic inch B engine. On paper, the 400 sounded better. Bigger displacement, more torque potential, a modern replacement for a classic design. But many enthusiasts would later argue the 383 was actually the better performer. Why? Because of bore and stroke balance. The 400 used a massive 4.34-inch bore with the same 3.38-inch stroke architecture, but emissions-era tuning strangled it. Low compression ratios killed performance. The engine felt lazy compared to the high-compression 383S. Meanwhile, the earlier high-compression 383S retained the sharp throttle response and rev-happy personality enthusiasts loved. Those earlier engines represented the golden era before everything got ruined by regulations and insurance companies. And once the golden era ended, the 383 quietly disappeared into history. No dramatic farewell, no massive marketing campaign, just gone. But racers never forgot, especially in NHRA Superstock and bracket racing, because the 383 block was incredibly strong. Those thick cylinder walls could handle overbores and abuse. Racers discovered the engines responded beautifully to ported heads, bigger cams, and modern intake systems. With aftermarket upgrades, naturally aspirated 383 Mopars could push well over 500 horsepower while remaining surprisingly streetable. Some builders were getting 550, even 600 horsepower with the right combination of parts. And unlike rare HEMIs, parts were affordable. That mattered. A real 426 HEMI block today can cost absurd money. Original cars sell for 6 or 7 figures at auction, but the humble 383, enthusiasts could still build them without mortgaging their homes. You could find blocks in junkyards. Cranks were available. Aftermarket support remained strong because so many were produced. That accessibility helped create an underground cult following. You'd find them in dusty roadrunners, old Chargers, sleeper darts, Coronet R/TS hiding in garages across America. Guys who'd rather build a nasty 383 than chase the hype of more expensive options. And some of those engines were terrifyingly fast. One famous setup involved the 383 Roadrunner, equipped with Chrysler's Air Grabber induction system and a 4-speed manual. Magazine tests from the era recorded quarter-mile times as low as 13.5 seconds at around 105 miles per hour. Superstock magazine ran 1 to 13.48 at 106 miles per hour. That was real performance. Not brochure fantasy, not theoretical numbers, actual results with witnesses and timing slips. And here's what makes the story even crazier. The 383 often made better street power than the HEMI for average drivers. Sounds impossible, right? But think about it. The HEMI's massive ports and race-inspired design needed RPM to wake up. At lower speeds, especially with street gearing, the engine could actually feel lazy unless you pushed it hard. Below 3,000 revolutions per minute, it felt almost ordinary. The magic didn't happen until you revved it, and most street driving never reached those RPM ranges. The 383 Magnum didn't have that problem. Its smaller ports increased air velocity, combustion stayed responsive, torque arrived earlier. Around town, stoplight to stoplight, the engine felt alive all the time. Every throttle input produced immediate response. It felt faster in daily driving, even if the HEMI had higher peak numbers. That's why so many street racers respected it. One former Mopar racer reportedly said, "A HEMI scared you. A 383 beat you before you realized the race started." And then there was reliability. The forged steel crankshaft versions of the 383 were incredibly durable. Bottom-end failures were rare unless the engines were severely abused. Oil control remained decent even under aggressive driving. Cooling systems worked well compared to some rivals. And because the engine didn't produce the insane internal stress of a HEMI, components often lasted longer. Piston rings stayed sealed, bearings survived, head gaskets held. That balance made it special. Not the biggest, not the fastest, but maybe the smartest. And today, collectors are finally starting to notice. For years, 383 equipped Mopars sat below HEMI and 440 cars in value. But prices have climbed steadily as enthusiasts realize these cars represent something unique. Genuine muscle car performance without the impossible rarity and cost. A numbers-matching 1968 Dodge Charger Or/T with a 383 Magnum now commands serious money. Clean roadrunners equipped with the engine are increasingly difficult to find. Even Dart GTS 383 models have become highly collectible because so few survived. Remember, these cars were driven hard, very hard. People street raced them, blew transmissions, wrapped them around trees, modified them endlessly. Rust destroyed thousands more. They weren't treated like collectibles because nobody thought a base big block would ever be valuable. So surviving originals matter, and modern engine builders have pushed the platform even further. With aluminum heads, modern hydraulic roller cams, forged pistons, and upgraded oiling systems, today's 383 builds can exceed 600 horsepower, naturally aspirated while remaining reliable enough for weekend cruising. EFI conversions make them even better. Modern ignition systems unlock performance the original engineers never imagined. That's incredible for an engine architecture born in the 1950s. But maybe the most important part of the 383 story isn't horsepower at all, it's respect. Because this engine spent decades trapped between legends, overshadowed by the HEMI, ignored beside the 440, treated like a compromise instead of a masterpiece. Yet in many ways, it represented the best version of the muscle car formula, affordable enough to own, powerful enough to scare people, reliable enough to survive, and simple enough for ordinary mechanics to understand. That combination matters more than most people think. The Dodge 383 didn't dominate headlines because it wasn't outrageous enough. It didn't have hemispherical combustion chambers or triple carburetors or giant advertising campaigns. It just worked. And sometimes that's harder to achieve than building a monster. Today, when you hear one fire up through open headers, there's a sharpness to it. A cleaner, quicker sound than the deeper thunder of a 440. It revs eagerly, snaps through RPM, feels lighter on its feet, like an engine with something to prove, because honestly, it still does. The forgotten Dodge 383 V8 may never have become the superstar of the muscle car era, but it quietly became one of the most respected engines among the people who actually drove these cars hard. Not because it was the biggest, not because it was the rarest, but because it delivered real-world performance, durability, and character in a way few engines ever could. And maybe that's the real story. The engines history remembers aren't always the ones drivers loved most. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the forgotten legends of the muscle car era, let me know what engine you want to see next. And make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next story hiding beneath the roar of American V8 history.